Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by Poets and Writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host and executive producer, Estelle Erasmus, and today I'm talking with Mimi Nichter about her book, Hostage, a memoir of terrorism, trauma, and resilience. And I just want to tell you a little bit about Mimi. She's an award-winning cultural anthropologist who studies core concerns in contemporary American society and global public health. She is a professor emerita of anthropology at the University of Arizona. Dr. Nichter is the author or co-author of 4 anthropology-related books. Her memoir, Hostage, was selected as a finalist for the Literary Award in Nonfiction at the Tucson Festival of Books. Her essays have appeared in Newsweek, HuffPost, and Brevity. Welcome, Mimi.
Thank you. I'm so excited and honored to be here with you today.
Well, I'm really delighted to talk to you about this book because it's such a powerful title. First of all, you have the word hostage in there, and that just brings a visceral reaction from people. And this is events that happened 50 years ago. And this was the first internationally recognized or known or shown incidents where a plane, an American plane, was taken hostage, and it was more than just one plane. Can you give a little nutshell version for people who don't know the whole situation?
Well, I'll make it personal. So imagine this. I'm 20 years old. I've spent a summer in a kibbutz, a communal farm in Israel, picking pears. I'm wearing a green mini dress, and I'm excited to get back home to college, where I'm going to start my senior year. I get on the plane, and then right over Brussels, the pilot says, it's going to be 8 hours till we get to New York. And just then, 2 people run down the aisle, and they say, before long, they get into the cockpit, and people yell, he has a gun, she has a grenade. And someone gets on and says, you're being hijacked. This is a hijack. We're taking you to a friendly country. This is the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. So at that moment, you would think I would be scared out of my mind. But I and many of the passengers on board, it was a full plane, were not so scared. It wasn't, as you just said, it was, 1970. And this was the first incident where this didn't happen. There had been skyjackings before, but that was really planes taken from Miami to Cuba, and it really was about money or something like that. And initially I thought, oh, this is a big inconvenience. I know it sounds almost unbelievable now.
I get it. It was a very different time. There was no social media. We didn't have cell phones. So what was the reasoning that you said, this is it, now's the time? And I know that you've been silent about it for decades. So let's talk a little bit about how that all came to be.
I think, first of all, this occurred in 1970, a very long time ago. And on a cultural level, that was a time when we really didn't talk much about, or at least in my family, we didn't talk much about our personal traumas, our personal feelings. We could be friendly and outgoing and all that, but some things were best hidden. And that's how I was brought up and socialized. And so, on a cultural level, it was okay not to talk about things that you didn't want to. Very different than today. I think on a more personal level, brilliance was too frightening to really talk about. And when I returned home, I went directly from being a hostage to going home, and then a short time later going back to college. And there was nothing like trauma therapy, or even the concept of PTSD had not yet been developed.
Yeah. And not
And
even EMDR therapy at that
no,
time.
definitely not. No. So nothing like that. And in fact, like all the soldiers who came back from Vietnam, you just went back home, right? Straight from the war zone.
Yes.
And that's how it was. And unfortunately, as we know how many people suffered from the lack of trauma therapy early on, it wasn't until much later that it became, especially now or the last decade or more, that it's become okay to really examine our traumas and to
And
talk about them.
I was wondering, maybe just to get that visceral impact, if you wouldn't mind reading the beginning of your book. Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes it pays to be late. I'm the last passenger to board TWA Flight 741 in Tel Aviv. Having barely arrived in time for the 6 a.m. departure, I'm put in the only available seat, first class, where I savor the freshly squeezed orange juice and made to order omelet, welcome luxuries for my backpacking lifestyle. Of course, my luck is short-lived. Within hours, I'd be wishing I'd been a lot later. After a stop in Frankfurt, I moved to an aisle seat in coach. The man beside me is heavy-set, his dark hair slicked back and threaded with silver, far from the seatmate I'd hoped for. A handsome 20-something guy with whom I could flirt and have a drink. After a summer that was a dead loss for romance, I'm ready to get back to my college campus. The constant catcalls and see-through my clothes gazes of Israeli men had bothered me, an American student driven abroad by wanderlust. At least at home, guys are a little less obvious about their intentions. The pilot announces we're flying over Brussels, 8 hours until we reach New York. I'm trying to read when the air shifts. A woman sprints down the aisle toward the front of the plane, a guy close behind her. I'm unsure how to read the situation. Maybe they're having a fight and she's trying to get away from him. Or maybe she's feeling ill and in desperate need of a toilet. Someone yells, "He's got a gun. She's got a grenade." And suddenly, I know exactly how to read it. Or I should know. I hear the words, I understand them, but can't fathom what's happening. The running man yanks open the blue curtain dividing coach and first class. A stewardess boldly moves from the galley into the aisle in front of him, putting her hands out to block the way. She says something to the man and woman that I can't make out, but I figure she's telling them they can't go any further. The purser, who's been moving through coach selling headphones, rushes down the aisle and taps the man on his shoulder. The man swings around, pointing his gun at him. Get back, get back. This is hijack, he yells. Hijack, he shouts. His accent sounds Middle Eastern. The purser gasps. Maybe we all gasp, or maybe we're holding our breaths. It's all happening so fast. The man with the gun steps toward the stewardess. Imshi, Imshi, move it, he says, motioning her toward the cockpit. His companion follows. When they reach the cockpit door, the gunman bangs and kicks at it. The co-pilot opens the door a crack and the couple push inside, slamming the door behind them. The word hijacking ripples through the plane like a shockwave. Passengers turn to one another, their partners, family, strangers. I hear the word grenade repeated. Painfully aware of how alone I am, I try not to look at anyone. Like a hermit crab, I retreat into myself.
So I wanted you to read that because I wanted to get that visceral impact of what you, a young college student, were facing in a time of, I would say, way greater naivety than today's day and age. Today, the first sound of something, people would be hitting the deck, would be filming, it would just be chaos. Now, you basically sat on these memories, this experience for quite a few decades, for 50 years. What was the impetus that got you to say, I've got to write this down? Or maybe you'd been writing it down all along.
It's a big question, a multifaceted one as well. In some ways, I knew that I wanted to write about it, but I couldn't. I wrote things down at the beginning when I came home. So I had those notes, and very occasionally, like once or twice, I had just gotten very vivid memories and written kind of a sketch of almost the first things that happen in the hijacking. But that didn't mean it was possible for me to talk about it. As I got older, I think, and my career and things started to become a little less dominant in my life, I began to envision a story, a book I could write, but it didn't really take shape until I retired, and especially until mental health became such a dominant narrative in people's lives, in writing, and our personal mental health, the traumas that we've lived through. And that really opened the door for me to begin to consider examining it. We really don't know what like courage and resilience we have until we're faced with it.
Yeah. And your career was a cultural anthropologist. So this excavation of cultures and the ways that cultures work is certainly something I think that you bring into this book in looking at the people that took you. I also think that unlike October 7th, where Hamas went in with total brutality, your captors seemed a bit humane in this situation. Nobody was killed in all these takings of hostages from multiple airlines, some that are now defunct. And they just seem to want to share their stories, which is a very different scenario than what people have seen today and know what's happened from October 7th. So you have an understanding, I think, because you afterwards you traveled all over the world with your husband of many years. He wasn't your husband at the time, but it was also like a way of you getting away from the scenario that you were dealing with that you couldn't really talk about. I think you were on a few TV shows in a news-oriented focus because that was the big news at the time. But then you just very much left the States, went on to do your life, which actually tied into your career. So you had bits and pieces, and you have in the book, you show photos, you have news clippings. What was the decision to do that? Because paper, print, photos at all costs.
Right. I needed to remember to write a book. And 50 years is a really long time to get at fine details. And so, yeah, actually, all those newspapers, my parents had clippings. And so when I actually, it was interesting when I finally decided I was going to write, I found a box in my house, miraculously, that had my notes, but it also had all the New York Times and the New York Post and all these articles that my mother had fastidiously cut out from the newspaper every day, because that's basically how we got our news at that time, that and the nightly news. I found that reading those articles and clippings and things like that really fired my imagination. So an image itself really opened up a lot. Yes, those were the top picture. I'm in the center there. And that's after our release. And just to explain how little we knew of what was going on, we used to joke on the plane, and we had to have moments of joking, that the first day, of course, we were on the first page of the New York Times and all the, big papers in New York. But After we'd been held on the plane for 6 days, we just thought, oh, now we're in the back. Now we're on page 10. And as the days went by that we were held, we just envisioned where we were in the paper until finally we thought, does anyone remember?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I sense in the writing the distance of time, right? There's a distance because it didn't happen yesterday. It didn't happen last week or last year. It happened 50 years ago. So this memory or who you were then is what you're recreating. And so it kind of makes it, I would say, easier to read than maybe a more angst-ridden piece or book. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do. And I think it's important that I explain that the other books that I've written and a lot of my research has been focused on adolescents and young adults. So I've written on body image, on social smoking among college students, the impact of social media on young adults' life. So basically, I have interviewed hundreds of young adults, exactly the same age I was. So it wasn't that difficult, at least that part, to put myself in a 20-year-old body because I'd written so much about 20-year-olds. So I hope that it helps the reader because my goal in writing this was really that you as the reader could get the view that I had as a hostage and be along with me every moment of it. So I wanted that visceral piece of it, which was challenging for me as an academic.
Right. As an academic, you have to have distance from your material. And yet, this is something that not only affected you so profoundly, it affected the rest of your life. It affected what you decided to do, probably with your career, perhaps. I'm not sure, because you were still in that mode of going to college and deciding.
Yeah, no, I was an English literature major in college. I kind of always knew I wanted to be a writer, turned my writing into my anthropology. But I think the travel that came right after this
Yeah.
as a way of just really grounding myself in this life, this world, away from the fear,
Yeah.
placing myself in much of North Africa and Africa, Asia was frightening at times, but yet it was really important for me to kind of walk slowly through the world and get my bearings. And I think that what I learned in that trip, which was 16 months, just a year after the hijacking, was that I really wanted to live in the world and find work that would allow me to travel and live in other places and begin to hear other people's stories. I knew I had the ability to do that.
They try to humanize themselves with you as well. Do you think any of the Stockholm syndrome thing happened with the hostages, with the people who took them?
Not at all. And I think it's important to say that there were two parts to this, really, the story. One was the 6 days plus that we were on the plane and sat on the plane for 6 long days and nights, if you can imagine it. We were, at the start, we were 143 people. The mere fact of no water, no flushing toilets, dehumanizing, I think there were moments of compassion that they showed to us. There were also moments of anger. And when I said there were two parts, there was that part, and then almost most of the people, because they actually over the course of the week had 3 airplanes. So 3 airplanes full of passengers in the middle of the desert, far, far from any airport. And they held us. And then the second part was they took certain people, they just took 31 people and kept them for another 2 weeks. So I was one of that second group, of which there were only 5 women. So I think when I talk about their story, which I got to hear, we decided to listen to them. I mean, 2 women came, 2 Palestinian women came to the 5 women. Actually, only 4 of us listened, one left the room to hear their story. And I'm not sure everyone, I know that the other people I was with did not interpret their story. The Palestinian story about their loss of land and their loss of their trees and their loss of their homes that they had experienced in 1948, we had a different history. as a Jewish young woman. And the other women with me were all Jewish as well. And suddenly I heard this other story, and I did listen to it. I did sort of let it in. So I don't know which came first, my being an anthropologist or by being open and seeing the compassion that they had. And when I talk about compassion, I talk about it in a way, it wasn't that they didn't threaten to kill us. They did. They threatened to kill us. And in fact, moments after I was taken off the plane, they blew it up. It was very, very frightening, of course. And I was always convinced that if this happened just 3 years later, we would have all died.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
With the
But
change.
I don't think there was any Stockholm syndrome. I would say it was more an awareness of, for example, I'll give you an example, when there was a lot of Orthodox Jews on the plane who didn't eat. And they didn't want to starve people. So here we were in the middle of the desert, and they were feeding us minimal things, a half a piece of pita bread, a hard-boiled egg, some water, very little water, very little to drink at all. But they realized that they had to keep these Orthodox Jews alive, and they brought them fruit.
Right. That's a very different scenario than probably anything that would happen today.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was definitely a different time. And when you went back to college, it was like that Patty Hearst era, like there was like a glamour to it, which you write about in the book, which seems, it's hard to believe, but yet I do believe it because I think that was the culture of the time and that rebel feeling.
Yeah, it was the 1970s, and I was at college in Washington, D.C., really the center for all the protests. Thousands and thousands of people come for moratorium on this, women's rights or the anti-Vietnam War. So as a college student at that time, most of my friends were involved, as I was, with the anti-war movement, not wanting to be seen as imperialists. And that's also how the Palestinians saw us, and they saw me as an imperialist. I wasn't an imperialist. I was fighting against that at home. So there was this othering that was taking place for me. And then when I returned to college, I found that my friends who really thought it was the little element of being like really romanticizing the situation.
Yes.
Like, wow, you were held by real revolutionaries. Far out, man.
Yeah. And that, again, would not be something today that would be looked at that way. So it definitely is a product of the times. How do you decide when you're writing that kind of traumatic material, even if it's so many decades ago, what to keep in and what to take out and definitely not include? Like, did you have a bellwether for yourself on that?
No, I think it might have been better if I had, but my mind doesn't work that way. I just wrote, and then in my editing process, I realized that what I had talked about too much or too little. The actual hijacking and the being a hostage after the planes were blown up, that had its own trajectory. But it was the rest of my life. 0 to 20, right? And that was the real problem, if you
The
will.
secretiveness, keeping your voice hidden, being silent.
That silence that I had, but then
Yeah.
how much do I talk about? Like, I've lived such a full life. What do I want the reader to know now about my life? How I lived through the experience, yes. But so I needed to isolate some parts. And so it happened in the editing process.
Do you feel that if you had written this decades ago, it could have been an issue with your family, with your mother, with your father, perhaps, maybe more your mother?
Yes, I do. I
Yeah.
do. Now she's passed, of course. But I do have there's family members who haven't read it. Of course, my immediate family has read it, and they're like-minded to me. So they don't have a problem. And the world's changed too. Yeah, I think I would have had, especially my mother was so quiet about anything personal, particularly about my brother's mental health issues. And so I think they would have been devastated. So I don't
Yeah.
think I would have I could have written the book, but it would have been a different book.
Yeah. You kind of had the chains off to be able to write it now. You didn't have anything holding you down.
That's right. And I also had to find, I think, had I written it earlier, I wouldn't have had to find that narrative thread of why I didn't talk about it.
Yeah, that is definitely a through line
It,
because it's not just this thing that happened to you, it's how it affected your life and the cultural way of looking at things, at least from your family at the time. And just like you had to overcome your past conditioning to be able to get your story out, which is probably why it's so important to you that now it's out.
yeah, it's important on two levels. On one level is the story, which in some ways has repeated itself now after October 7th, in a
Yeah,
much more violent way, of course.
yeah,
Right. There's that part because it's still the same story going on. It's never been resolved. I'm talking about Israel, Gaza, the Palestinians. So that hasn't been resolved. And in the same way, I think what you're saying is right, that I needed time to finally be able to take the step to be able to say, this is a story worth telling, because a lot of people have the same experience. Not that they're a hostage in a very real sense, being held somewhere where they're not by others, but they're hostage internally to
yeah,
their own problems, issues, things that have happened, their own secrets, their family, whatever. So many
yes,
people are living with that kind of burden. So that
yes.
was there was that level of it that I felt like it was culturally an important moment too.
Absolutely. So, how do you understand after living with this in you for so long, this experience? Because it was big news at the time, and then it's on to the new news, and of course, you're living your life. What is it that you learned about yourself from now writing it that you didn't know before?
I didn't know before how much fear I had inside me. Even now, when I read the book, now it's published. And it's just, I still cry. Either I'm really crying or I need a tissue by my side because I feel like I'm going to cry. And writing it too made me cry because I had really put it away. So I had put it away somewhere inside some box. I learned how to compartmentalize a long time ago. And so that's what I did. I have to stop for a moment as I'm crying right now. Just, I never realized what it took to keep this all inside. So writing it, letting it out, most days I feel good about that. Now that the book, when I got the box of books, it's just like, oh my God, I did it.
It's therapeutic.
In a way it is, but I feel like I learned, people ask me, is it healing? Is it healing to write? It is healing, but I've also learned that it's a process. Healing is a process like grief. I don't think you ever get over it. Like, I lived a fine life, family, children, career, etc. But this was something I never examined.
So, a lot of people who are professionals,
Mm,
academics, lawyers, doctors, a lot of my students have that different professional background.
mm,
And they say becoming a
mm,
writer,
mm.
whereas it might have been something they've used in the profession, you've used it as a cultural anthropologist to write other books. It's a very, very different milieu. It's a whole different community. It's a whole different entree point. And so, what did you do to get yourself up to speed in an area that wasn't your area?
That is a very important question because, as I said earlier, even though I'd written a lot before, I'd written books before, so I had the ability and the knowledge to write a book, which in itself is something, how do you
Yeah.
go from A to Z? But I didn't know how to write from my own feelings. And I think the earlier writings that I did were, in other people's words, clinical. I put down the facts, which is often what we do in memoir. We write the bare bones of it. So the story is fleshed out, particularly this story of the hijacking and being a hostage and all that. But then I had to go back, which was greatly aided by classes. So I took a lot of, it was I started writing during the pandemic, and there was a lot of Zoom classes available. So I took a lot of Zoom classes. I read books like your own, right? Along the way. And I had people read it, and I realized people kept saying to me, you have to go deeper. They'd write in the margins in the early, draft. What did you feel then? And I'd like sit there like, what did I feel? Because I really hadn't written from my own feelings. I would write from my own analysis for my academic work, but my feelings were not something I put on the page in books for people, anybody.
That probably felt dangerous to you.
It did feel dangerous and very vulnerable. I said very vulnerable. And so
how did you get past that hump? You were just like, I have to do it. I have to bite the bullet, just do it.
I sat with it for a long time, and I think I kept working on it. And I get a little bit from different classes and from different students too, looking at their writing, reading their writing, and going, oh, okay. Really understanding what it meant to use sensory details to explain what I was feeling. And so once that was kind of more grounded, it was more than saying, describe your feelings. It was, okay, what did it smell like on the plane? What kind of sounds did I hear at different moments? Of course, what did it look like? Because I'm primarily a visual thinker. But to go through those other sensory details and
I think about your green mini dress that you talk about, which is what you wore throughout practically the whole thing until they gave you something else to wear.
Yes, how inappropriate is that? Sitting on a plane in the desert for 7 days.
Yes, and you talk about it. You talk about it in the book about how you had fears, your legs were exposed, there were holes, it was dirty, it was a whole, there was some dangers.
Yeah, and in the beginning, I think too about the writing, I could describe details. Like, I remember a friend of mine was reading it early on, and I could really remember the bathrooms because there was no running water and toilets and the smell and all that. And so that was easy for me to write about. She had read, like maybe the first.
But sensory details are so important to paint a picture and get the reader into the story. Now, what about your path to publication? Because you're with Potomac Books, it's with University of Nebraska, right? Nebraska Press. And so how did that all happen? Did you have an agent? Did you find them? Were they working with you on other books, academic books? How did that work?
My other books were all published by academic presses, but I didn't go back to them because I knew it's kind of published, which academic presses publish Memoir and who doesn't. So they didn't. And at first I started querying, and I'd have success, but that was very short-lived. They'd want to read something and then, oh, no, thank you, the sort of thing. Crushing, of course. And then I got an offer from Potomac. I mean, I knew how to do research on publishing. That part was okay for me. Writing a proposal was okay for me. I'd done that before in the academic world. But it was hard to get published because I was looking at a time when the war in Gaza, they'd just taken the hostages in Gaza. So everything was focused on that. And my story was very old. I got an offer from Potomac Press, which focuses books on the war and military. So it was a good fit for them. And the same day that I got the offer from them, I got an agent.
That's great. So that's usually how it's working these days,
I really wanted to write this book for something bigger than, not have an academic press, because I'd done that already.
Right.
I wanted something bigger. They've been great. They've been really different. University of Nebraska Press does a lot of creative nonfiction. And so they're helpful and out there in the world, more so than academic publishers.
That's great. And what is your plan are you going to be doing a lot of speaking for the book? Are you going to go to bookstores, podcasts, what is the plan?
All of the above.
All of the above.
I'll be at the San Diego Writers Festival and various bookstores and places in California. And I'll be making a lot of trips around.
That's great.
and
So
podcasts.
my final question to you is for writers listening who are carrying a difficult story and they're not sure how to approach it, what would your recommendation be for even first steps, getting that story out there on the page?
The first step would be to think about maybe just writing the first few pages and see where that leads you. And don't be in a rush to find a whole narrative voice for it. That'll come much later. I think we need a lot of patience when we're opening up this box of untold stories. Many things will connect. So I think to let your mind be open to what comes on the page.
Yes, that's great advice. Be open and just let it flow. They call it like a crappy first draft or a shitty
Exactly.
first draft. You just
Yeah.
get it out there and then you can cut and paste and move things around. I think
Yeah.
that's so important. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Mimi. Hostage, a memoir of terrorism, trauma, and resilience, and reading your then 20-year-old self going through this experience is riveting. And they always say memoir should be written like a novel, and this absolutely is. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Follow me at EstelleSErasmus.com on my website and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.